Hello wingmen, this is the Moza AB9 force feedback base. Mounting suggestions, clicky triggers, joyful sticks, and setup guides are inbound on your location, so strap in and prepare to be bored. Before the AB9, I had been using a pair of Thrustmaster Warthog bases on my sim pit. One side mount for the F-16 and Rafale, and a centre mount with an F-18 stick for everything else. Enter the Moza AB9. It's 228mm long, 157mm wide, 204mm high, and other dimensions. Being a force feedback base, it also has some Newton meters. No, not Isaac Newton holding a meter stick, as seen here post-manhood measurement, but the ability to provide a momentive force that not only provides control feedback, but that is also strong enough to push back on your inputs. So imagine, if you will, a 1 meter long lightweight stick that is attached to a wall at one end and has a 1 kilogram bag of sugar hanging from the other. 1 kilogram of mass accelerating in Earth's gravity would produce a force of 9.81 newtons. That would produce a moment, or torque, of 9.81 Newton meters at the connection to the wall. If we doubled the number of bags, then we'd have to halve the length of the stick to maintain that same 9.81 Newton meter moment. And double again the number of bags if we reduce the length of the stick to 1/4 of a meter. If we flipped the AB9 on its side, added a grip, then if we hung almost 5 bags of sugar from the top of the grip, then the base would need to produce a torque of 12 Newton meters to counteract the moment produced by the weight of the sugar. Moza claims that the peak torque output is 12 Newton meters, though peak would normally suggest a short time period as the motor will heat up, affecting its performance, whereas a sustained torque would typically be a slightly smaller value. I ordered and paid for the AB9 shortly after it was announced in 2024, though didn't receive it until May 30th, 2025. The box and its contents come in at just over 7.5 kilos. Everything is very well packaged, especially considering the weight of the AB9 itself. The usual accoutrements can be found inside the box too, like the power supply, USB cables, etc. Everything you'd need to get connected to your PC and up and running. However, note that the base does not come with a grip, so any Moza or Thrustmaster compatible stick will be required. Inside the dust cover, you'll note that the AB9 has a decent throw, i.e., unlike many bases, the pivot point is much lower than that of the base of the grip. On the side of the unit that would normally face away from you, there is a power button, a power input, 4 future utility connections, and a USB connection. On the base, there are a number of mounting points. I plan on using the 4 M6 bolt pattern. My SimPit is basically a SimFab cockpit that I bolted onto the top of a DOF Reality P3. After removing the existing Thrustmaster base, I stripped down the mounting area as much as possible and got to designing and 3D printing a mount that would place the AB9 as low as possible on my rig and as close to the stick cutout in the SimFab seat as much as possible, to best replicate the previous stick position I had modelled upon the F-18's cockpit stick location. I have provided a link in the description below to download this mount if anybody is interested. From that moment on, it was simply the case of attaching my custom mount to the SimFab frame, making it secure, and then using 4 M6s to attach the base to the mount. This made for a very solid base that I could rely on when the motion of the DOF P3 is in full swing. I chose to use my existing Thrustmaster F-18 grip with a shorter 3D printed extension to account for the additional height of the AB9 base compared to the original Warthog base. One thing I don't like is that the cables are very exposed at the front of the AB9. For most people, I guess these connections would be facing towards the underside of a desk, but for me, my legs need to sweep past these connections when I get into the sim pit. I knocked together a quick cover in Fusion and 3D printed that too. Once connected and powered on, the base goes through a self-calibration routine that moves the stick to the maximum and minimum X and Y coordinates, and then centers based upon those measurements. The software is very straightforward and has come a long way since I downloaded it for the first time in May. The base is auto-detected, but note that the software doesn't appear to have a list of all compatible grips yet, such as the Thrustmaster grips. So the software just assumes it's a Moza grip. This really doesn't matter a great deal, as Windows still sees the grip as a multi-button joystick that can be bound to controls. Prior to enabling a specific profile, you can go into the settings and drill down within the settings to find a pre-made setting, or import presets that you've either been sent by a friend or a user profile that has been found on Moza's Discord. I would recommend doing this prior to jumping into the cockpit and not just assume that the software has automatically loaded the correct profile. By clicking on the base icon, you can deep dive into settings. In basic settings, you can choose between direct input, telemetry force feedback, or integrated force feedback. Some DCS modules, such as the Phantom for example, have well-coded force feedback built into the module, and you can just use direct input for those aircraft, whereas many Microsoft Flight Simulator modules have no customized force feedback whatsoever. So the integrated FFB may be the way to go, you'll just have to experiment. You'll also see that you can set the amount of torque output along with spring or recentering force, and also a number of other options such as response curves, etc. In this example, I'm going to show you how to set up the trim centering option on the HUE within DCS. You'll need to uncheck hardware trim mode in special and click save. I've provided a link to this preset in the description below. In DCS, you'll want to go into Settings and then the Special menu. Scroll down to the UH-1H and ensure that Trimmer mode is set to Central Position Trimmer mode, and then click Controls. Select UH-1H and scroll down to Pilot Trimmer. I have bound the nose wheel steering button to this on my F-18 grip. Then scroll down to Trimmer Reset and bind that. I used my NWS disengage paddle for that. So once in the cockpit, you can see that you can move the cyclic around as you would expect. However, we can depress the pilot trimmer button whenever we want to set a new trim center, and then hit Trimmer Reset when we want to go back to the original trim center, i.e. the default center. This is really useful for a number of reasons. Oh, hang on, it looks like we have a slow-mo soldier over there. DCS AI really is the gift that just keeps giving. Anyway, back to those reasons. You can maintain a precision hover, as once you've found your equilibrium, you can retrim the center and just sit there. Okay, in the air, we can quickly find our sweet spot at cruise and do the same. You know that if you'd normally just let go of the cyclic, then you'd probably end up pointing at the sky, or worse, at the ground on your side. This way you can trim, take your hand off the cyclic to go through some other procedure with your mouse, and return back to the cyclic without fearing a loss of control. Coming up ahead of us is Teufelsberg radar station, clearly architected by an absolute comedian and hero. And now into the Phantom. In case any of you are wondering, the reason why I have my motion rig turned off is because I knocked my camera tripod over while trying to film this segment, and I wanted to avoid that happening again, so I chose to turn off the motion rig. As the Phantom has a hydraulic-based flight control system, the feedback from the well-modelled hydraulics can be felt through the stick. It's fantastic. Even the aerodynamic shuddering when you're approaching a stall on the control surfaces, you feel everything. Evidently, you wouldn't get such fine feedback in an F-16 or an F-18 for that matter, because both of those aircraft are fly-by-wire. There is no feedback into the stick for that matter. You're only inputting your command, and the flight control system is using a wealth of inputs to determine how it should position the flight control surfaces. For that reason, I've kept my Thrustmaster F-16 as the side stick, and I use a basic spring setup within Moza when flying the F-18 or the Typhoon. That said, the Spitfire's control surfaces were connected to the pilot's control column and rudder pedals through a mechanical system that includes cables, rods, and bell cranks. This system allowed for precise control over the aircraft's attitude, with the control column moving the ailerons and elevators via push rods and cables, while rudder pedals operated the rudder through cables connected to the tail assembly. Using the Moza with Warbirds is an absolute joy, and really made the experience come alive for me. You can feel the pressure on the paddle and its release when you're about to stall the Spitfire in a raid fight. One could say it feels like cheating, but I guess that's how the original plane would have felt. So the ultimate question, would I go back to the Thrustmaster Warthog with its spring for my main combat flight stick? Well, the answer is, oh hell no. Until next time, wingman.